What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Welcome to day 284 of the 365-day graphic novel review challenge. Today I want to talk to you about JLA, American Dreams. This collects issues 5 through 9 of the JLA series from the mid-90s by Grant Morrison and Howard Porter. Yesterday, I talked about a couple of my criteria that I look for in a really good Justice League series, and two of those were really strong character interactions and character depictions, and also the stakes have to be incredibly high to warrant the Justice League working together on whatever adventure is being thrown their way. And this book continues to have both of those in spades. This is actually 3 short stories instead of one continuous arc like the previous volume was. And even though it's several really short stories, this book does not shy away from raising the stakes in each of those stories. The first story has the Justice League saying that they need to have a recruitment drive, they need to have more heroes in their midst so that they can handle more problems, be more efficient, etc. And we are introduced to a character named Tomorrow Woman, and I won't spoil the twist with her, but slight spoiler, she does not join the Justice League, and that issue is really great because it focuses on her character quite a bit while also not making this a Tomorrow Woman issue that the Justice League cameos in. We still get a lot of really good character stuff from each of the characters in that issue. Superman is at a funeral at one point, and it's just like a one-page funeral scene, but he has some really good character stuff there. At one point, we get to see Kyle and Wally playing Rock'em Sock'em Robots, and even though those two kind of started butting heads with each other in the first volume, we can already start to see their friendship starting to develop here, which is great because these two characters are very similar once they put aside their differences of Wally being a veteran and Kyle being a rookie. And I really like getting to see these two interact. And even though they're starting to be friendly with each other in this volume, we also get to see Wally still being a little bit of a butthead every now and then towards Kyle. So that's going to continue just a little bit here. But I like that we get to see some development on that front. And really, it's not like any given story in this series has a huge character moment for any of the characters. It's a bunch of really small character moments. There's one point where Superman comes into the Batcave and tells Bruce, I needed to borrow your teleporter to get to the satellite, or not the satellite, the tower that's on the moon, and Bruce just says, well, you could have knocked, by the way, nice costume, and it's Superman wearing the electric blue costume that you can see right there, and I know a lot of people really don't like the electric blue Superman, and if you hate it so much that you don't even want to read this series, I will say Superman doesn't have the electric blue costume for long. It's like 1, maybe 2 more volumes after this one. I'm thinking it's just 1 more volume after this one. But anyway, if you don't like that, it's not a very prominent thing that's featured in the series, but he is wearing a blue costume. Anyway, at one point, Batman says, well, you could have knocked. And then as Superman's walking towards the teleporter, he just says, hey, Robin, how's it going? And it doesn't feel like a false greeting. It feels like Superman's genuinely saying, like, what's up, how are things? And that's just a small moment between Batman and Clark, but it really feels genuine. It feels like Grant Morrison really has a handle on their voices, even though before this moment, Grant Morrison hadn't really written either of these characters before this series. He had written Batman a couple of times in a couple of short stories, but he hadn't really written a lot of the main characters of the DC Universe before writing JLA. And it's really shocking to me, going back and looking through this series, that even though he hadn't written any of these characters before except for Batman, that he has such a good handle on their voices, and I really like that quite a bit. The next story that we have is a 2-parter that loosely ties in with the Underworld Unleashed storyline that was going on at this time. You don't have to read Underworld Unleashed to read this, although I would recommend Underworld Unleashed because I did like it quite a bit. But I actually read this trade paperback many years before I ever read Underworld Unleashed, and I understood everything going on here just fine. It just barely has Neron and the Demons 3 talking about kind of what's going on a larger scale, but mostly we have an invasion of some corrupt angels coming to Earth to do some bad stuff, and we are introduced to Zariel. Zariel is right here. That's him on the cover. Apparently, the legend says that Grant Morrison wanted to bring back Hawkman, and DC editorial said, no, Hawkman is way too confusing. His backstory is just a big, huge mess. You can't bring back Hawkman. That's a little weird considering, like, less than 2 years later, Jeff Johns brought back Hawkman in JSA. Ultimately, I'm not bitter because I really like what Jeff Johns did with Hawkman in JSA and then later in his own solo series. I like that solo series a lot. So I'm not mad because I do like what was was done with Hawkman later, but it is a little weird that Grant Morrison is one of your powerhouse writers, and he says, I'd like to bring back Hawkman, and you say no to him. I think it would have been really interesting to see what Grant Morrison would have done. I'm curious if he would have said that Katar or Carter, either one, if he was actually in heaven and then came back to Earth, because he was using angels in this storyline. So I'm wondering if he would have tied Hawkman to the Christian religion and the Judeo-Christian heaven. I don't know. Maybe he wouldn't have. But I like Zariel. I wish that we could have seen more of this character outside of this series. Every time I see him, I just think that he's really cool. At one point, he says something about, I wish everyone could just hug and just make babies. And basically, he's saying he wishes there wasn't as much fighting going on. But the way he says it is really funny, and it's not something you would expect an angel to actually say. I like this character quite a bit. And I talked yesterday about how a lot of times Grant Morrison will introduce new characters, and then everyone else will just ignore that character. I'm pretty sure Zariel counts as one of those. I think I've seen him like twice outside of Morrison's JLA. I'm pretty sure he showed up in the Shadow Pact series later on, and I think he also showed up in JSA to talk to Kendra Saunders. But anyway, I like Zariel quite a bit. I like this story. This is how a tie-in with a bigger crossover event should happen, where it acknowledges the crossover event, but you don't have to read the crossover event to find out what exactly is going on here. If I'm just reading JLA and I don't have access to Underworld Unleashed, I don't want to feel like I'm missing out on something when I'm reading JLA. And when I was first reading this series, I was in high school, and my high school library actually had these trade paperbacks and did not have Underworld Unleashed, so that was actually the situation I was going through. So I'm really glad that he was able to make this tie-in with that without making it necessary to read that. Although, like I said, Underworld Unleashed, not a bad story. Go ahead and read that if you want. So the last two issues in this book features a return of a character from the 60s called The Key, and he has kind of gone through his grim and gritty remake in this volume. Basically, he kidnaps the Justice League, and he wires them all up to some virtual reality simulators, and each one is going through their own little imaginary story / Elseworld scenario. For example, Superman, he is living in a world where Krypton never exploded, and the Green Lantern of his sector, I believe it's Tomar Ray, he crashes on Krypton, and he gives Kal-El the Green Lantern ring. So Superman becomes the Green Lantern of his sector. And then Batman, he lives in a world that it's not necessarily a happy world because the Joker is still terrorizing Gotham City. It's still Gotham City. It's recognizably so, but it's a happy ending for Batman. He marries Selena Kyle, has a kid, and then Tim Drake becomes the next Batman. So it's kind of similar to the setup of Earth 2 before Crisis on Infinite Earths, where Batman got married and had a kid who became a crime fighter. It's just that the names have changed a little bit. And then Wonder Woman, she kind of has like a Indiana Jones type status quo going on with Steve Trevor, where they fight supernatural Nazi menaces and stuff like that. Each character kind of has their own little weird Elseworld thing, and what's really brilliant about this is that the Key understands that the Justice League always wins. There is no way to prevent them from being victorious. So he has programmed this virtual reality thing to go in his favor, if you will, once the Justice League teams up to defeat him. And so he's turning their victory into his victory. And that's something that is very brilliant. You never see the bad guys becoming so meta-aware, I guess. He basically says, yeah, there's no way that I can actually defeat the Justice League, so whenever they start to defeat me, I'm going to win. And it's going to turn him into a god is his goal. And ultimately, I'm not going to spoil a whole lot, but ultimately he obviously doesn't win. But anyway, that's a really great two-parter that also throws in Connor Hawke, the son of Green Arrow, the original Green Arrow. So I really like that one. And once again, it's a character that Grant Morrison just seems to flawlessly have a perfect hold on that character's voice. So anyway, those are my thoughts on American Dreams. I hope that you guys liked this review. If you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with a different video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.